I beg to move that this House has discussed the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh. Madam Chair, Nagorno Karabakh is one of those places that few people can pronounce properly, let alone spell, let alone locate on a map. Yet in recent months it has been the location of a bloody war involving thousands of fatalities and casualties, a bombarding of civilian areas and destruction of towns and cultural sites, the use of internationally banned munitions, and now a return to ethnic cleansing. It's involved not just Armenians and Azerbaijanis, but also global powers such as Russia and Turkey, with significant implications for the geopolitics far beyond this remote area of the southern Caucasus. Now, I declare an interest as the all-party group for Armenia chairman, and I'm well aware that this has been a long-running dispute over many, many years between Armenians and Azeris, only contained during the days of the Soviet Empire, but which flared up again in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I'm aware that most of the international community recognises Nagorno-Karabakh as most recently largely Azeri territory. And I don't want to reopen that centuries-old argument, but whatever your view on the future government of Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, as an independent state as per an earlier referendum result, or as part of an extended Armenian state, engaging in a bloody war and an almost medieval-style battlefield invasion is not the way to resolve this dispute, and I hope that we can all agree on that. And however slow and problematic it has proved, there has been a legitimate internationally supported resolution process in place, namely the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Minsk Group, the current status of which is rather unclear after the conflict, with the boots on the ground now provided by Russian troops and others supported by Turkey. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole history of this conflict, certainly not in an hours-long debate, but the recent military action started at the end of July when Azeri forces, unprovoked, launched attacks at various points on the Armenian-Azerbaijan border in the northeast corner of Armenia, far away from Nagorno-Karabakh. That attack was defended by Armenia robustly. It was accompanied by bellicose statements from Azeri government ministers, and especially the Defence Ministry, which raised the prospect of the Armenian nuclear power station at Metsamar being within the range of Azeri missiles. It was followed by deliberately provocative joint Turkish-Azeri military exercises close to the Armenian border, and words of encouragement from the Turkish government under the slogan of two countries, one nation. I wrote to the Foreign Secretary on behalf of the group at the time. That letter was published, and I received a chastisement, I would call it, from the Turkish ambassador, who criticised me for the deeply biased tone of my letter, which fails to reflect the current situation in the region, and said that he had irrefutable evidence, both circumstantial and concrete, that clearly indicates the current aggression and violence once again started as a result of Armenian actions. When I asked him what that was, he failed to produce any evidence, concrete, circumstantial, or otherwise. So I think it is widely accepted that this conflict was started and completely unprovoked by Azerbaijan. Yet there was hardly a whisper from Western powers, including, I regret to say, the United Kingdom, beyond the usual diplomatic niceties of returning to the negotiation table. This was clearly a prelude for the serious assault on Nagorno-Karabakh, which started on September the 27th, again unprovoked. It was also... I will, of course.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Can I just say how much I agree with what he's saying? And this might seem like a conflict in far-off lands, but our diaspora communities here have brought it to our attention. I know that he knows Annette Moskofian, my constituent, who is from the Armenian National Congress, ANC, UK branch. I've also got the Hayashin Centre, the Navastarian Centre, and they've played a vital part when it feels like the eyes of the world have forgotten this.
I'm grateful for the honourable lady's attention, and absolutely, I know she has a large community of Armenians, and I pay tribute as well to Annette Moskofian. We'll give the spelling to Hansard later, and the work of the ANC, who represents so ably the Armenian community here. But that invasion was almost 100 years to the day from when the Turks originally invaded the newly independent Republic of Armenia against the backdrop of the Armenian genocide, which they still deny to this day. On September the 27th, Azerbaijan launched sustained air and artillery attacks, as well as an infantry offensive along the entire line of contact with Nagorno Karabakh, indiscriminately shelling civilian populations and peaceful settlements, including the capital, Stepanakert. Remember, Nagorno-Karabakh has a population of just 146,000, 91% of them Armenian in origin. They are supported by the small country of Armenia with a population of just 3 million. Attacked by oil-rich Azerbaijan with a population of 10 million and a defence budget of almost $2 billion annually, and they spent $1.6 billion on a defence deal with Israel alone, almost the equivalent of a single year's budget. That attack included the involvement of F-16 Turkish fighter planes and rocket launchers brought in from Nakhchivan, neighbouring Turkey. Turkey being one of the largest standing armies and one of the largest spenders on defence in the whole world. During the 45-day bloody conflict that followed, countless soldiers on both sides lost their lives. Numbers are not known because bodies are literally still strewn across the battlefields. It's difficult to tot up those numbers, and I was reminded by the International Red Cross that there are still some 5,000 people unaccounted for from the conflict back in the 1990s. The International Red Cross also estimates there have been 150 civilian fatalities and over 600 injured. 14,000 civilian structures, homes, schools, hospital and heritage sites, including churches, were damaged or destroyed, including attacks on churches full of people at prayer or praying inside. The most worrying aspects of the conflict, Madam Chair, has been the use of Israeli so-called kamikaze drones, the silent killers which hang over a battlefield and then, before anybody knows they're there virtually, explode their deadly cargo. That was a game changer for this conflict in what is a notoriously impenetrable mountainous area of the world. But also worrying was the use of banned cluster bomb munitions, the so-called Kinder Surprise ribbon bombs, because they have ribbons on them, are picked up by children so often, thinking that they're some sort of trinket only to explode. Those cluster bombs were used on a maternity hospital, on schools, and Shushi Cathedral, as witnessed by journalists from the Telegraph and other Western representatives. They were delivered in Russian-made 9M55 Smersh rockets, described by Amnesty International as cruel and reckless and causing untold death, injury and misery. Also deeply worrying about this conflict was that Turkey, a NATO member, illegally transferred NATO-grade Bayraktar drones to a non-NATO member country for use against civilians. Now, that did at least attract a cancellation of export licenses on certain defence items from Canada, Austria and the United States. But I think most worrying of all, Madam Chair, was the importing by Turkey of thousands of jihadi insurgents brought in from Syria and Libya. Videos of them have been circulating, openly involved in the conflict, and in some cases, openly parading the decapitated heads of executed Armenian soldiers. It's reported they are paid a bonus, literally, for the heads of Armenian military. Armenian families report having received gruesome videos of the mutilated bodies of their relatives sent to them by these terrorists. And it's being advertised in northern Syria, apparently, that if you sign up for settlement in Nagorno-Karabakh, you will be given a parcel of land. Now, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said in a report that reports indicate that Turkey engaged in large-scale recruitment and transfer of Syrian men to Azerbaijan through armed factions, some of which are affiliated with the Syrian National Army. The alleged role of Turkey is all the more concerning given the similar allegations addressed earlier this year by the working group in relation to its role in recruiting, deploying and financing such fighters to take part in the conflict in Libya. The way in which these individuals were recruited, transported and used in and around the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone appear consistent with the definition of a mercenary as set out by relevant international legal instruments. That's the UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. So it's not just hearsay. So this is deeply worrying, Madam Chair. And after 45 days of this bloody conflict, a ceasefire was signed on November the 10th, brokered by President Putin and the Russians. The Armenian Prime Minister signed this declaration clearly under duress, without any reference to the President, Ministers or Parliament, because it was a fait accompli imposed by Russia and Turkey. Under its terms, the indigenous Armenian population from 3 regions were given just days to evacuate their lifelong homes. The Russians gave 9 Armenian villages just 48 hours to leave their ancestral homes without any chance to organise their exodus or to secure support from the UN Commissioner for Refugees, for example. The Russians and Azeris continue to draw arbitrary borders without involving representatives from Armenia or Nagorno-Karabakh itself. And what's become an island of remaining Nagorno-Karabakh territory is to be connected to Armenia through a narrow Lachin corridor under Russian Azeri control, and a new link between Nakhchivan and Turkey in the west and Azerbaijan in the east has been carved out of land in the south of Armenia itself. And the noble Baroness Cox, who has been an extraordinary champion of the Armenian nation and the Armenian people, recently visited the war zone. I think it was her 87th visit to that part of the world. And she reported back in deeply distressing terms about what she had seen. Lines of refugees taking their belongings, heading for the safety of Armenia, carrying whatever possessions they could, taking with them livestock, even digging up the graves of loved ones, fearful for their bodies being desecrated after they'd left, and torching their houses so they would not fall into the hands of the Azeris. This, Madam Chair, is ethnic cleansing, pure and simple. No Armenians feel safe in lands that have been their homes for years and are being intimidated out to be replaced by Azeris and, as I said, jihadi terrorists. And that should raise serious security alarm bells for the West as well. Genocide Watch declared a genocide emergency alert last month, but the cleansing continues apace. Now, we had a briefing from the International Red Cross through the IPU last week. They calculated that there have been many thousands of military casualties, but the figure is still unknown because of bodies still unretrieved. They've no idea of the number of detainees on each side, and it's hard to access those prisoners, and there have been reports of torture and executions of those prisoners. Russian peacekeeping forces and Turks in some places actually turn out to be Syrian mercenaries. So, Madam Chair, why is this significant? This is a small population in a remote part of the world. Well, it's significant because we should all take an interest when a nation and these territories, the people in these peace-loving people in these territories, are persecuted in such an unprovoked way. It's significant because of its geopolitical implications as well. Turkey has extended its influence eastwards to the Caspian in an unholy alliance with the Russians. Russia has reasserted its influence over former Soviet republics and effectively stamped on the independent credentials of Armenia as one of the few democracies in the area. Russia will effectively exert control over the Armenian military and take over Armenian oil projects and effectively gain a military base in Nagorno-Karabakh and take over Armenia's foreign policy. These are all significant shifts in the spheres of influence in this volatile region, just as Russia has been extending its influence in the Ukraine and Turkey in Syria, both getting a taste for territorial expansion by force or stealth. The Azeris will be given free rein to continue ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh and the suppression of its Christian culture. In the last 15 years, Azerbaijan has been more aggressive in destroying UNESCO-protected Armenian World Heritage Sites than even ISIS were in Syria. Not a single church or Armenian cross stone has survived in the historic Armenian Nakhchivan area. Over 189 churches and more than 10,000 Christian crosses have been blown up by the Azeris. And Israel doesn't come out of this well either, trading high-tech weapons, which made that strategic difference in this war, for energy, relying on around half of its oil from Azerbaijan, and supporting an Azeri president who embraces militiamen who behead prisoners, mutilate bodies, destroy churches, and engage in anti-Christian campaigns. As the US writer Michael Rubin put it, Armenia is a democracy, whilst Azerbaijan has become a family-run dictatorship. Armenia embraces religious freedom, whilst Azerbaijan works with Islamist extremists. And yet, few have come to the aid of Armenia in these last few months. And Armenia and Armenian people in Nagorno Karabakh are the victims in all of this. All of this happened when the US was somewhat preoccupied by the controversy over the presidential elections. There have been minimal sanctions on weapons, but largely everything I have described has gone unchallenged. Now, I welcome the meetings that we had with the Minister who's here today, and I acknowledge the calls by the Foreign Office for an end to the conflict, a return to negotiating tables and respect for human rights, and we've given some aid in the region as well. But when a UN motion was proposed to prevent intervention of third parties in the conflict and to denounce the presence of Syrian mercenaries in the region, which was so important, it's reported that the United Kingdom government stood in the way of the proposal, and I'd welcome the response from the Minister on that when she responds at the end of this debate. Where has been the condemnation of the use of Syrian mercenaries? Where has been the condemnation of the illegal use of cluster munitions? Where has been the condemnation and pressure on Turkey, a NATO member and ally, which has allowed NATO-grade weapons to be used against a democratic sovereign country, Armenia, and is now exercising a worrying extension of its power into the Caucasus and beyond? I have to say, I'm afraid the silence has been deafening, Madam Chair. Many in Armenia are claiming that their ally, the United Kingdom, has let them down, and I can see why. We need Western peacekeepers in the region urgently to monitor ethnic cleansing and the activities of the Syrian mercenaries. We need a proper investigation into war crimes and the treatment of prisoners. We need to consider the future independence of Nagorno-Karabakh, as the citizens voted for many years ago and as supported recently in the parliaments of France, Holland and Belgium. And I think, Madam Chair, it is time at last to recognise the Armenian genocide by the Ottoman Turks, a century-old outrage which saw between 1 million and 1.5 million men, women and children massacred by the Ottomans in the first genocide of the modern age. And I should tell the Minister that together with other honourable members of both Houses, I have prepared the Armenian Genocide 1915 to 1923 Recognition Bill to commemorate the Armenian genocide through official recognition and remembrance and put formal recognition of that genocide on a statutory basis. And I hope there will be considerable support for that measure in this House and in the other House as well. Terrible things have happened, Madam Chair, in the southern Caucasus. They are no less terrible because of the remoteness of a country which few know about. But these terrible things, perpetrated specifically by Azerbaijan and its Turkish allies, need to be acknowledged, they need to be called out, and they need to be punished. And I ask the Minister to start that process today.
The question is that this House has considered the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh. I'm not intending to impose time limits, but I am asking members to bear in mind that I would like to start from bench speeches at 8 minutes past. So if I can call for Real Clark, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I shall be brief. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm grateful to the member for East Worthingshire and for securing this debate, which is an important opportunity for us to raise the dire situation faced by the people of Nagorno Karabakh, and it's a pleasure to follow on from him. I take a keen interest in this conflict for many reasons, but in particular as Vice Chair of of the APPG on Armenia, and is also a member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, but is also someone who grew up hearing the horrific stories of the genocide of Armenian people in Turkey. As it's been set out by my honourable friends, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham, Nagorno-Karabakh is an autonomous region of Azerbaijan with an Armenian majority population. Since 1994, it has been controlled by Armenians as a self-proclaimed independent state, although no country recognises the statehood as of yet. On 27 September this year, after some alarming escalations during the summer, the worst violence in the region since 1994 erupted. By the 13th of October, around 1,000 people had been killed as Azerbaijani forces advanced past the line of conflict established as part of the 1994 ceasefire. This conflict has caused a humanitarian crisis in Nagorno Karabakh. There is reports and evidence of numerous violations of international law by Azerbaijan, including the use of banned cluster bombs, the murder of elderly and disabled civilians, and the torture and humiliation of captured Armenians. Perhaps the most shocking of all, Madam Chairman, Turkey, a member of NATO, an organisation funded to secure a lasting peace in Europe based on common values of individual liberty, democracy and human rights and the rule of law, has been providing military support to Azerbaijan. Turkey have recruited and transported jihadi mercenaries to bolster Azerbaijan forces who are using Turkish weapons and warplanes, in particular drones. And the military attack on the people of Nagorno-Karabakh has been accompanied by a campaign of hate speech towards Armenian people, both in Azerbaijan and in Turkey. Garo Paylan, one of the very few Armenian members of Turkish parliament, if not the only one, has said that, I quote, Armenian origin citizens have become scapegoats and the object of rising racism and hate speech. The current climate reminds me of previous anti-Armenian pogroms. Turkey's Armenian community and citizens of Armenia who live in Turkey no longer feel safe, end quote. Madam Chairman, any conflict which leads to loss of life is a tragedy, but a conflict where civilians are deliberately targeted and international law is ignored, and in which the involvement of a member of NATO, abandoning all pretenses of neutrality and making things worse rather than better, is a conflict in which the West should sit up and take notice. And to be fair, we must acknowledge that US, France, and the EU other EU countries have raised concerns about the transportation of mercenaries, but the UK, unfortunately, has been conspicuous only by its silence. And this broad lack of interest from the West has resulted in Armenia being forced to agree a peace deal devised by Russia and Turkey. And I kid you not, and potentially with Turkish troops being deployed to Nagorno-Karabakh to keep the peace. The scale and the horror of this conflict cannot be laid out in the few minutes that I have today, but the urgency of the need for action is only matched by the moral imperative that sits behind it, that those responsible for atrocities listed should be charged with delivering a lasting and equitable peace is unconscionable. The UK government and the international community must act. So I ask today, Madam Chairman, will the UK government condemn Azerbaijan on using cluster bombs on civilians? Amnesty International reported that there is growing evidence that Azerbaijan used cluster bombs in Nagorno-Karabakh. The capital, Stepanakert, in particular, was attacked with cluster bombs, resulting in an unknown number of civilian deaths. The use of cluster bomb violates the ban on indiscriminate attacks and violates international law, as we know it. Is the UK government aware of the above reports that Azerbaijan used cluster bombs in Nagorno-Karabakh? Does the government consider such violations of international humanitarian law to be unacceptable? If so, will the Minister condemn these breaches? Will the government use its influence to put pressure on Turkey, a NATO member, to remove the mercenaries from the region and stop their effort to relocate mercenary families from Syria? Will the UK support Minsk Group re-engaging for a final settlement for the status of Nagorno Karabakh? It is, Madam Chairman, it is reported that British-manufactured parts were used to build Turkey's Bayraktar UAVs, the unmanned aerial vehicle, the drones, which were used extensively by Azerbaijan during the war. How does the government trace the unsolicited sale of British military IP by Turkey to third countries? And finally, Madam Chairman, successive governments, including mine, successive governments' failure to recognise the Armenian genocide, despite all the evidence, has led to yet another near experience for Armenians in the region, once more being removed from their ancestral land. Will this government follow most countries in the world and our allies and finally recognise the Armenian genocide? Thank you.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, may I commend the member for East Worthing and Shoreham on his excellent speech, with which I fully agree. Whilst I grieve for the suffering, particularly of civilians in any conflict, because time today limits me, in speaking of the conflict of Nagorno Karabakh, I want to highlight 2 points. And these have been highlighted to me today by Baroness Cox. They're in her report, and I hope that the Minister will read her full report, Grief and Courage in Nagorno-Karabakh, because there is much more within it. But she particularly wants me to highlight, firstly, the urgent need to secure the return of Armenians still held as prisoners of war after the ceasefire, and of ensuring that ongoing atrocities against them do not continue. And secondly, the need to ensure that Azerbaijanis are held to account for the atrocities committed both during and after the conflict. And so can I ask the Minister what action our government is taking, both itself and with international partners, to prevent the further abuse of Armenians held captive and to secure their release and bring to justice those responsible for war crimes during this conflict? What assurance can the Minister give us that investigations into alleged war crimes, particularly those classed as genocide by Genocide Watch, as we've heard, will be carried out, investigations will be carried out by a properly constituted, neutral and recognised international body? Now, it's heartrending to hear in Lady Cox's report of multiple accounts of, despite the ceasefire, of brutality inflicted on military and civilian prisoners of war. And equally heartrending to hear from the Nagorno-Karabakh Human Rights Ombudsman as follows, and it's in her report. We have evidence of the deliberate targeting of civilians, ambulances, hospitals, religious sites, electricity, gas and water infrastructure, and the use of chemical incendiaries. We've sent this information, but we've received no adequate replies from major aid organisations. We are totally isolated. What information can the Minister give us of what aid from the UK has reached those in need of help in the area, and how is it being applied? Now, Baroness Cox's report states, the scale and ferocity of these offences has intensified the justifiable fear among local people, who are 94% Armenian Christians, of the possibility of ethnic cleansing from their historic land, with grave implications for the region. She goes on to say, we remain deeply concerned by the lack of international engagement with and balanced reporting of the suffering of civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And whilst the report cites the history of oppression of Armenian Christians over the past century, it also states, attempts by some to prevent the latest escalation of violence as an Armenian aggression or to suggest Armenia is equally culpable for the violence and civilian destruction that has taken place are manifestly untrue and dangerous. It would be entirely against the interests of Armenia to initiate the recent war. Now, the reason I've quoted that is because yesterday evening I had the privilege of speaking with a member of a family from Armenia. This person now lives in the West but has family still there. And that individual echoes the concerns of Baroness Cox in such a way that, as time permits, I want to just cite in some detail from an email that I asked that person to send to me and received this morning. They call for the urgent release of prisoners of war and the freedom for the Armenian soldiers who are in hiding to return home. It states, the majority of soldiers who fought at the front lines were newly drafted 18-year-old boys, only 2 or 3 months' experience in the military. They were only equipped with 20th century weapons to fight a 21st century military. The reality in Artsakh is that the 150,000 Christian population was in no way prepared to face a 21st century invasion. It was an uneven battle. Armenia's military was weak and unprepared for drones, mercenaries, F-16s, and military intelligence backing Turkey and Azerbaijan military forces. Around 5,000 Armenian military men were deployed to the front line, the majority of them 18-year-olds who had just enlisted in the summer. And indeed, the writer's 18-year-old cousin was one of them, now injured and missing. The email continues. These young men are in desperate need to return home. We believe they are alive either as prisoners of war facing daily humiliation and torture, or they have been in hiding, in desperate and immediate need of medical attention. There are hundreds of young men and women in hiding, unable to obtain food, security, care for their wounds, and basic human needs. Azerbaijan officials have placed a price on their lives. Their new demands since the ceasefire agreement have been to either exchange Armenian soldiers for more land or for a ransom to be paid for each soldier. Red Cross negotiations and efforts have failed to set these men free. Will the British Parliament voice the immediate need to release these men from these dire, inhumane conditions? In the same email, the writer grieves at the continual violation of the ceasefire against, and I quote, servicemen, women and civilians who face annihilation where their lives, homes, churches, heritage and their culture are being destroyed in front of the entire world. And the writer comments that not only is aggression not part of Armenians' Christian way of life, but that Armenia does not have the practical means or resources to be an aggressor, and that the military invasion of Nagorno Karabakh should be yet another wake-up call to Christians around the world following the demise of Christian populations in other parts of the Middle East. The writer also expresses concerns that not only is Azerbaijan actively removing the Christian population, but is also going about the potential rewriting of the history of the region, citing the example of the 9th to 10th century Armenian monastery in Dadivank, today being presented by Azeri officials as an ancient Albanian site. And finally, the writer also comments that in order to protect human lives, the Armenian people ought to have the right to self-determination on lands they have called home for nearly 2 millennia.
Shannon.
Chair, and first of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend, and indeed he's a good friend, for setting the scene so very well. With he and I share many concerns. Also, a pleasure to follow my honourable and good friend as well, Lady for Congleton. I suppose behind all of us here we've had two superpowers, Russia and Turkey, both playing for their own advantage and using the Armenians as a meat in the sandwich, so to speak. Perhaps one that sticks in my head is in the reports is the Baroness Cox, who's also Vice Chair of the APPG on Freedom of Religious Belief, who recently visited Nagorno Karabakh, and her words are telling. One family whose son, an Armenian soldier, was captured by Azeri forces said his phone was stolen by his captors, and they posted an image of his beheaded body and sent this to his own social media account for his own family and friends to see. Brutality, criminality, and absolutely detestable actions. Same urgent concerns were raised by the Armenian Human Rights Ombudsman Arman Tatian, who told Baroness Cox we have video evidence of torture and mutilations. Azerbaijan have returned 29 military bodies and few civilians. DNA was needed to identify 4 bodies. They refused to provide the list of current prisoners, and they continue to withhold information and access to prisoners from the Red Cross. So Turkey has, behind Azerbaijan, has totally ignored what's acceptable for the rest of the free world. I don't know if any of us in this place could read this information and not remain untouched. It's being possible. I certainly wish to see what more can be done, not simply to ensure that the ceasefire remains in place, but to see the return of soldiers home to their loved ones. I also want to express great concern in the very short time that I have, Madam Chair, just to say that the attacks on civilians, on innocents, on churches, on the dispersal of the Christian community, ethnic cleansing, despicable criminality, and those involved in the murders and the extreme violence should be accountable for their war crimes. Exact numbers are unknown. Armenian officials in Yerevan told Human Rights Watch that Azerbaijan hold dozens of Armenian POWs. Armenia is known to hold a number of Azerbaijani POWs and at least 3 foreign mercenaries. Whilst I read carefully the response of the Minister for the European Neighbourhood to the ANC, it is clear there is more to do than to applaud a ceasefire. The ceasefire was despicable. I'm asking, will the government, in recognition of our obligations to the Geneva Convention, uphold our British values and demand that Azerbaijan ensure that safe return of all prisoners of war? Further, will government commit to set up its own commission or working group and support local efforts to accurately determine the number of captives and monitor their return? I finish with this, Madam Chair, and I think I've spoken quicker today than I've ever spoken. There's more to be said, but not enough time to do it. And as I highlighted, there are POWs to be returned from both nations, but it is clear that the horrors faced by too many families have not ceased with this ceasefire, and we must intervene where we can and use any and all diplomatic pressures at our disposal. Madam Chair, I'm sure that you would join with the rest of us in our beseechment to the Minister, asking the Minister for action and support for this war-ravaged nation, and particularly for the Armenians who have been despicably and unbelievably treated. Thank you.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Ms Cummings. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also congratulate the member for East Worthing and Shoreham and commend him on what I thought was an excellent, balanced speech, and it's a great pleasure to follow so many thoughtful and passionate contributions from all sides of the chamber this evening. The dreadful upsurge in the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh has seen 2,700 deaths that we know of, and as we've heard, there is concern that it could be worse. So we should be glad of this ceasefire, and it is very much to be welcomed, but our concern is very much that it's good news for now, and particularly as we see the refugees return to their homes, that we could see tensions escalate again. Armenia handing over the disputed regions of Kalbajar, Lachin and Agdam has impacted upon upwards of 90,000 refugees. There are many thousands of people impacted by this, and we believe there is a huge effort to be done in clearing munitions, making the area safe going forward. So we do believe that there's a need for international observers of that process, not just from one country, not least when it's not partial itself. And we do need to see that the international community remains engaged in peace building within the region. And I would be grateful for an assurance from the Minister this evening that the UK will play its role within that coalition and take a greater role than we've seen, frankly, hitherto. But there are some conflict lessons that we can learn here from the situation in Nagorno Karabakh. Azerbaijan, in global terms, does not have a huge defence budget. $2 billion is a considerable sum of cash, but in global terms is not huge. And yet, by buying in advanced weaponry from other places, particularly armed drones and GPS-guided ballistic missiles, it was able to turn the balance. Now, that's indicative of the threats that we face here and will face going forward. So I'd be grateful for a reassurance from the Minister tonight that these evolving threats will very much be part of the integrated foreign and defence review, which is, of course, ongoing. I'd also hope that in that review, the UK government will take good note of the SNP submission, that we do need to work globally towards closing the loophole and the grey legal area that lethal autonomous weapons operate within, because this is a globally significant issue. The conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh has cooled for now. That is very much to be welcomed, but there could be plenty others, and particularly that these weapons are so easily deployable worldwide to various places. This is going to be an ongoing global issue. So the UK could do much to close this legal grey area. I'd be glad of an assurance tonight that we will work towards that and can rest assured of the SNP's support within that project. I will be lodging a 10-minute rule bill to help in that discussion shortly, because we believe that will calm tensions within Nagorno-Karabakh, but it will also calm tensions elsewhere. So there's much to be done, and I look forward to the Minister's comments this evening. Thank you.
Your chairmanship this afternoon, and it was great to hear the introductory, very strong speech from the chair of the all-party group for Armenia, and indeed the vice chair. And I look forward to hearing the Minister reply to the member for Enfield North about the banned cluster bombs and the potential violations of international humanitarian law. And we've all heard this afternoon that the conflict has had all the hallmarks of a truly dreadful modern international conflict. The use of heavy weapons on civilian areas, involvement in third-party competence and regional powers, the impotency of several international organisations to facilitate peace at the beginning of this, and an unfolding and tragic toll on the civilian population, the destruction of homes and infrastructure, and, as the member for Congleton said, the destruction of places of worship. And yet, despite all of this, it's true to say that the humanitarian catastrophe in Nagorno Karabakh and the wide-ranging regional geopolitical consequences have really not had the attention which they deserve from the global community. And that's, of course.
I'm grateful to our honourable friend. Would she not agree with me that when dual British nationals are caught up in a situation where people have been displaced, lost their homes, it's freezing cold at the moment, and, as she pointed out, people are having illegal weapons used against them in the form of cluster bombs. Does she not share my concern that there's been no full British ambassador for getting on a couple of years now, after the last one left? And it just adds to a sort of impression that, you know, this is deprioritised for this government.
She makes an excellent point, the member for Ealing Central and Acton, and she's been a real champion, bringing together with her other colleague, the member for Ealing, to make the case, not just for the diaspora who are really suffering here in the UK, but also for what is happening on the ground. Now, I have 3 questions for the Minister, because I know that we're keen to hear her reply. And would she please let us know what's happening in relation to the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, who just earlier this week have been unable to access all the detained combatants and have struggled to begin the process of the tragic returning of the deceased to their families. What role is the UK government playing in that effort? And could she please address this immediate and pressing concern? In addition, of course, the impact of COVID-19 brings an extra difficult dimension to the conflict, adding further pressure on the health authorities in both countries to cope with the injured and the displaced. Furthermore, the second question I have for her is the role which many members have mentioned today about Turkey, and the SNP spokesman was very eloquent in his questioning about the role of UK armaments to Turkey. Has she, as I have, as the Shadow Minister, together with the member for Caerphilly, who is the Shadow Minister for the Middle East, confronted the Turkish ambassador in relation to the situation, the potential use of Syrian and Iraqi fighters? And also, Turkey is an ally of the UK, is in NATO. We should be able to have these frank conversations and hold our friends to account. Finally, could she also tell us what she's doing in relation to the role of Russia and in terms of bringing on the international community? So it's not just leaving it to Russia, who of course traditionally has the military pact, but what effort is being made to breathe some life into the Minsk format, to reinvigorate it, so that the UK can really play its role, for example, in tabling a proposal for a new resolution in the UN Security Council. And of course, all members of this House want to see this conflict stop. They want to see the peace process being successful, but so much more if all of us get behind that peace process, not just leaving it to the protection of the Lachin corridor by Russia. So by offering clarity today, Ms Cummings, we can look forward to the Minister giving us, of course.
Does she feel that perhaps NATO has a role to play, a very key role? Because if you're a member of NATO, you have rules and regulations that you adhere or you should adhere to. And if someone doesn't adhere to that, in this case Turkey, is it not time then that their position within NATO has to be reconsidered?
As we're all aware, there's an enormous amount that Turkey does around refugees, being a welcoming force for Syrians, for example, in the terrible last 5 years of conflict. There's many things by which we can work together and be friends, but in this particular regard, and the use of that kind of weaponry and the bringing in of other mercenaries from the Middle East region, it's really just a cocktail for aggression, conflict, and that's why I felt I had to go as a Shadow Minister with the other Shadow Minister to make those representations, as I'm sure we will hear that the Minister has as well. Thank you, Ms Cummings.
Minister.
Thank you, Ms Cummings, in the time that I have got, I will endeavour to answer as many questions as I have, and perhaps if there is the odd point that I'm unable to cover today, I will come back to the honourable gentleman. Because I am very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham, for securing this debate today on an incredibly important topic. And I also pay tribute to him for his work as chair of the APPG for Armenia. As members across the House have illustrated today in this debate, this is a very sensitive and a very complex issue. And I can assure my honourable friend that I know I'm very, very conscious of the strength of feeling in the House. The government welcomes the cessation of fighting between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Since the fighting broke out, the government has been pressing both sides on the need to end the fighting, to secure a humanitarian ceasefire and to ensure a lasting peace settlement. And I have made these points directly to the foreign ministers of both countries. The impact the recent fighting has had on innocent civilians has been absolutely devastating, and it had to stop. And the government acknowledges that both sides had to make difficult decisions to reach this peace settlement. The government will continue to support both governments and the co-chairs of France, Russia and the United States of the OSCE Minsk Group to ensure a sustainable and fully negotiated settlement to the conflict. Only that will ensure stability, security and peace for the people of that region. And it's important that all further agreements and decisions are made under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group and with the involvement of the co-chairs of France, Russia and the United States. Despite not being a member of the OSCE Minsk Group, Ms Cummins, the UK was diplomatically active throughout the conflict. I spoke 3 times to both the Azerbaijani Foreign Minister, Minister Bayramov, and the Armenian Foreign Minister, Minister Manatsakhanyan, during the course of the conflict. I also spoke to the new Armenian Foreign Minister, Ivazyan, at the end of November. And I delivered strong messages of de-escalation and urged a return to the negotiating table under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group. This conflict came at an extraordinarily difficult time for both countries as they tackled the COVID-19 pandemic. And as members here today have pointed out, the approach of winter has further exacerbated the humanitarian situation. The internally displaced persons from both sides have required significant support. And this support will need to continue as the weather deteriorates. In late October, the Foreign Secretary announced £1 million in funding to the ICRC to support their efforts. And the government continues to consider what further support we might provide, including in the key area of demining, reconstruction and reconciliation. And on the specific point of access, which was raised by members today, we are aware of the challenges about getting access, and we are pushing that point. I'm happy to come back on that point, but it is something that we are aware of. In terms of the ceasefire, the UK government welcomed the news of the ceasefire. The security and safety of civilians is absolutely paramount. And I will.
With the Shadow Minister and myself recently. I just wondered if she'd had any comment on that point on consular assistance to our citizens there, and also just the impression people get that in the Minsk process it's France, US, Russia, and this country is dragging its feet. Could she step up our efforts there a bit?
Thank you. I can assure you that we absolutely support the efforts and the work of the OSCE Minsk Group in this particular regard. If there are specific consular cases, I probably need to come back to the honourable lady with those, if I may. But just turning back to the ceasefire and the importance of the safety and security of civilians. During my recent visit to Moscow, I met Deputy Foreign Minister Titov, and I noted the role of Russia in negotiations, and I welcomed their efforts to deliver this ceasefire. There are many details that still need to be clarified, and it's essential that any further developments agreements are made by Armenia and Azerbaijan and are in their best interests. However, this initial agreement paves the way for future discussions through the OSCE Minsk Group. We note that the agreement does not mention the future of the Nagorno Karabakh region and consider this to be a matter for the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs to facilitate discussions in light of the Madrid Basic Principles. During the hostilities, I also held discussions with the Turkish Deputy Foreign Minister Onal, and I urged Turkey, as a member of the OSCE Minsk Group, to fully support efforts to secure a ceasefire and a return to negotiations. Since the cessation of hostilities, I have spoken again to Deputy Foreign Minister Onal, welcoming the news of the ceasefire and urging full engagement with the OSCE Minsk Group as the primary format through which a peaceful and lasting settlement should be negotiated. Can I just try and make some more progress, Ms Cummins, because I'm conscious that I haven't got a huge amount of time, and I know that there are a lot of questions that I really want to try and answer. My right honourable friends, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, also spoke to their Turkish counterparts during the hostilities and delivered similar messages. Colleagues this afternoon have asked questions about the role of foreign fighters during this conflict. And I want to assure the House that the Government remains deeply concerned by reports that foreign fighters were deployed. However, we have seen no conclusive evidence on this matter. We are aware that Turkey gave strong diplomatic support to Azerbaijan. Turkey and Azerbaijan have long-standing strong relations and describe themselves as one nation with two states. President Aliyev himself has referred to the use of Turkish-made drones by the Azerbaijani army. Yet we have seen no evidence of direct Turkish involvement in the conflict. We will continue to raise any concerns we have on this matter.
There's a division in the House. Can I suspend this sitting for 15 minutes? Okay. Thank you.
Cummings, and to endeavour to resume where I left off. We were discussing Turkey and the engagement and involvement, and I was just going on to say that my right honourable friends, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, also spoke to their Turkish counterparts during the hostilities and delivered similar messages to those that I had delivered. Colleagues in the debate today have asked questions about the role of foreign fighters during this conflict, and I want to assure the House that the Government remains deeply concerned by reports that foreign fighters were deployed. However, we have seen no conclusive evidence on this matter. We are aware that Turkey gave strong diplomatic support to Azerbaijan. Turkey and Azerbaijan have long-standing strong relations and describe themselves as one nation with two states. President Aliyev himself has referred to the use of Turkish-made drones by the Azerbaijani army, yet we have seen no evidence of direct Turkish involvement in the conflict. We will continue to raise any concerns we have on this matter directly and with the government of Turkey. Members have also raised today, and I'm conscious that they've raised it previously with me, the issue about the alleged desecration of cultural heritage. And I know that many members of the other place also attach significant importance to this. The Government has been clear to all parties the desecration and destruction of cultural heritage sites is appalling and wholly unacceptable. When I spoke to Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Bayramov and Armenian Foreign Minister Ayvazyan in November, I expressed deep concern over these reports, and our embassies in Baku and Yerevan have continued to engage on this matter, and we fully support the efforts of UNESCO. On war crimes, I know that many honourable and right honourable members will have seen the videos that purport to show war crimes committed by both Armenian and Azerbaijani troops. I want to be clear, Ms Cummins, that this government's position on war crimes has not changed. Where we have irrefutable evidence that war crimes have been committed, we will call them out and we will take appropriate action. In this case, the evidence is not irrefutable, and we know that some of these videos are several years old or doctored. Nevertheless, I have raised concerns with both Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Bayramov, who committed to a full investigation, and with the former Armenian Foreign Minister Manat Sakanyan. Can I just try and finish the points, given we've already, I'm almost running out of time. Because there were some points that I did want to cover off that members have raised. One was the matter of the UN Security Council and direct question, had the UK vetoed a UNSC product? The answer is no. Whilst the UN Security Council was united in seeking an end to the conflict, unfortunately they were unable to agree the text of a statement. On prisoners of war, this was also raised today. I spoke to the Armenian and Azeri foreign ministers following the ceasefire agreement, and I've highlighted the importance of returning prisoners of war. And also I highlighted the ICRC as the primary mediator through which prisoner exchanges should take place, but we do continue to monitor that situation very, very closely. On cluster munitions, very briefly, this was also raised today. We are deeply concerned by reports that both sides used cluster munitions during the conflict. The reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which seek to verify the deployment of these munitions by both governments, are incredibly concerning. But just to try and draw this debate to some sort of a conclusion, while the government welcomes the recent peace deal, I can assure honourable friends and right honourable friends here that we remain deeply concerned by the humanitarian situation in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Right.
Please carry on. Please carry on.
We remain committed to utilising the diplomatic and humanitarian tools at our disposal to see lasting peace and recovery in the region. Since the cessation of hostilities, I have continued to engage with our partners. The UK and the international community has repeatedly welcomed the cessation of hostilities and stressed the importance that all further discussions are held under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group chairs. The United Kingdom will continue to raise any concerns we have over the protection of cultural heritage, the role of external factors and the humanitarian situation with the relevant parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tim Loughton.
Madam Chair, in the interest of all not freezing and being able to get to the next division, can I thank everybody for taking part in this debate?
Is that the House has considered the conflict in Nagorno Karabakh. As many are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. This sitting stands adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.